For this assignment, you will be reading one of my favorite poems of all time, The Bells, from Edgar Allan Poe. When you think of Edgar Allan Poe, you probably think of creepy things, right? Like Telltale Heart, dark, creepy things. This one is a little bit creepy, but kind of different. The truth is, Edgar Allan Poe was certifiably insane. And there were times when he was ill enough that he was bedridden. This poem was written during one of those periods. He was bedridden at home, and all he could hear was bells. In those times, there were a lot of bells that were used because they didn't have cars like we have now. So they had sleighs that would go in the wintertime or carriages in the summertime. He heard the bells from the sleighs. He heard the bells from weddings. He heard the bells from funerals. He heard the bells from the fire carriages. They didn't have trucks, so they just had a carriage that would carry the water, and he heard those bells. And so this poem is written all about those bells. By the end of the poem, it's intended that you should be feeling a little bit of the insanity that he felt because the bells were driving him nuts. So you'll notice that each verse gets a little bit longer. You'll notice that there's a lot of repetition that's meant to drive you nuts a little bit. One of the things that I love most about this poem is Edgar Allan Poe's use of words. He finds words that sound like the bells that he's describing. So, for example, in the first verse, he uses the word tintinnabulum. That just means the ringing of bells. But the bells he's talking about are sleigh bells, which have that really high pitch. If you think about Christmas time, the sound of the sleigh bells, they're a really high pitch, high tenor sound. So he chooses words like tintinnabulum that have the high T that makes it sound like those bells. In the second verse, it's alarm bells from like a fire sleigh or something like that. So those bells would sound harsh and ugly and would not be a beautiful sound. So he uses words like clanging and twanging to describe those bells because they're just ugly words, right? So it's genius the way that he uses words to sound like the thing that he's describing, right? In the last verse, he's describing funeral bells, the bells at a funeral. And there's a couple of lines in there where the rhythm, the meter of the poem changes. And it becomes very ominous because he's describing the king of the ghouls, the dead people that are excited that someone is about to join them. So pay attention to those things while you're reading this poem. Again, one of my favorites of all time. When you're finished, this is your assignment. Poems, like music, have the ability to influence our emotion even more than a typical story, or even more sometimes than watching a movie or something like that. So your assignment is to either write or find a poem that influences your emotions. I don't care how it influences you. If it brings you down, that's okay. If it makes you excited, that's okay. If you think it's funny and it brings out your humor, also okay. But I want you to either write or find a poem that influences your emotion. And then you'll submit that poem to me. You can just email it to me or just share it if it's in your Google Drive. This assignment should take one class period. So read the poem, digest it a little bit, and then start searching for poems or writing one that will influence your emotion. So have fun with that. Please enjoy the poem.